always go back to that Klosterman piece because people will say, why football? Like, why? And I'm obsessed with, I mean, everything I like, I kind of end up obsessed with for some period of time. But obviously, we dove into the deep end, JJ, with football. And he wrote a piece, I think it was on ESPN's blog. I brought this up a bunch of times. ESPN used to actually have a cool sports blog. Hunter Thompson wrote for it. And it was an excerpt, I think it was in his book, Walking the Dinosaur. But he talked about how progressive football is as a game, that it's always changing. That's copycat league and so on. It's always a moving target. It's always changing. And because of that, and this comes back to something I know, and I'm presenting the other perspective, right? Outliers, like, it's on one hand, you shouldn't try to predict outliers. And people like you and Mike Clay, who I got to have back on the couch again for the first time in a while. Love Mike.
Nice.
Like, fantasy football as an endeavor where you just stack 55, 45 bets, that works. And the data can give us your list of 55, 45 bets and just stack them up. However, in something like fantasy football, where you're looking for the championship, right? Or even like high stakes leagues, where you're trying to be the best out of 1,000 teams and not just 12 teams. Now outliers become more important. And outliers, I would say, win championships. Outliers are the players that are the difference. And even though we say it's hard to predict outliers, it's hard to find outliers, we fool ourselves into thinking we can see outliers coming. I do think the data can show us some of the indicators that give us at least a list of, if there's an outlier, it's going to come from this list, either based on the offense or who knows what. And I think that you still have to try. You still have to stick your neck out and try to identify the outliers. And most importantly, once we see the first few chapters being written that this player might be an outlier, be ready to get on board early. Like, put it on even someone like Odell Beckham in his rookie year, even though he had a hamstring injury and didn't start until late. Everything we had heard about him before he got hurt was wow. Just Zay Flowers, I think, is a good example. Like, because Zay Flowers catch as many balls as like peak Keenan Allen. Yeah. Yes. Right. Be open to these outliers being possible, because a few of them the ships are going to come in.
I think the thing that changed for me the most over the last decade or so in doing this, because I definitely started everything in my career in playing things pretty conservatively. I mean, we played in probably like 50 to 60 leagues together through the years, but like, I definitely have evolved in terms of the way that I approach players like Christian Watson, right? Like, Christian Watson is one of my highest rostered players this season because of what you're talking about, where you can easily talk yourself out of out of Watson based on the negatives, based on Jordan Love, based on the fact that, he didn't really see that high of a target share consistently in that offense last year, based on the fact that he was a 4-year wide receiver at a small school who wasn't, the most polished prospect in the world. But to me, it's more about looking at, and this is where, like, I think Dynasty and playing Dynasty can really help people understand investment in fantasy football, where in redraft, and this sort of goes to what you're talking about with Alexander Madison, in redraft, your opportunity cost in getting players after like round 3 is just not very significant. Like, the hit rates when you get to round 4, round 5, round 6, people will be shocked by how bad the hit rates are, with a lot of those players. So you might as well just sort of shoot for the moon and just go for it with a lot of these guys. And so, it's different than, last season's a really good example of this too, where I was okay enough with drafting Gabe Davis last year in redraft, but I was not okay in investing in Gabe Davis in Dynasty. And I got feedback from people saying, well, this doesn't make any sense because Gabe Davis is a 3rd-year wide receiver. You should be going after younger wide receivers in Dynasty. But the cost to acquire is totally different in these two formats. It's a totally different game. A really good example of that this year with me is Rashee Rice, who I didn't think Rashee Rice was a good prospect. I did not love him, coming out. He's, again, analytically 4-year wide receiver, non-Power 5 school, doesn't really produce until his senior season. Those are the kinds of flags analytically that can really, that scream bust, right? But from a redraft perspective, it's a depth chart that's climbable. There's really no one there on that depth chart that's scary. I mean, we can like Sky Moore, and maybe I know both of us are Richie James guys. I know that.
Yeah.
But there's players that we might like a little bit, but let's not pretend that Richie James or even a Justin Ross is a proven commodity, right? And so, given the fact that Rashee Rice, in Dynasty, you have to spend a mid-second round rookie pick on him, which is not insignificant. Whereas in redraft, you're just throwing that late round dart. If he doesn't work out, he doesn't work out. It doesn't matter at all. And so, that's the way that I think people need to sort of flip that switch and think about, because oftentimes, and I bet you get this probably more than any other analyst, oftentimes people say, well, what about the downside? Well, what about this? Because you're obviously looking at it from the perspective of mostly upside. And like you're saying, upside is what wins championships at the end of the day.